Hey everyone, I'm Cassie Dale along with my partners Emma and Amanda, and we're going to talk to you today about dog behavior. Okay, so to begin, I'm just going to go over the three publications that we kind of based our study off of. So the first one is by Jones et al., and it focused on the background of canine temperament, and it wanted to look at research that was previously done on canine temperament, such as the specific trends and also the methods of assessment. So what kind of breed, how old is the dog, and what is the sex of the dog? It also looked at the temperament traits and also the reliability and vitality of the actual canine temperament tests themselves. The second study by Trisco et al. Looked at, it was actually a year-long study that looked at dogs in a doggy daycare, and it found that some of the dogs displayed a dominant behavior. Some other groups of dogs did not display that behavior, but the majority of the dogs they did not show any behavior, so they were not dominant nor submissive. And the final study by Bradshaw et al. Looked at, it was actually a study that compared dominance in a freely interacting group of domestic dogs. And it actually compared that to the hierarchy found in wolves. And they found that in the freely interacting group of domestic dogs, there were only paired relationships that were evident, and it really wasn't a hierarchy system as you see in wolf populations. Okay, so our hypothesis of the study was domestic dogs on average will exhibit two dominant behaviors while playing for 10 minutes in a small group. In our small group, we did about 4 dogs per group. Okay, so our first objective, we want to determine what type of behavior is deemed dominant. So if you think about a dominant dog, they can have many cues. Some of these cues can be a lip curdle. They can have a stiff stance or vocalization, and that can, include growling. They can also have, hair raising, and it can start back here, start at the front of their ears and go all the way down across their back up into their tail. They can also display back arching. They can show their teeth, and they can also have a wrinkled nose. And all this kind of points to this dog as being dominant. Okay, so here we just have some pictures of these dominant dogs within our studies, and we just have captions on who everybody is. And I'll just take one of these as an example. So this is my dog right here, and she's kind of showing dominance. She has her stiff stance and her back leg. She's kind of making herself look bigger, and she also has a stiff tail and her ears are back. And these are all cues showing this other dog right here that she's being dominant towards him. Okay, so our second objective, we wanted to see what type of behavior is deemed submissive. So if you think about a submissive dog, it's the complete opposite of a dominant dog. Submissive dogs will also often have their ears back, their eyes will be blinking or half closed because they don't want to make direct eye contact with the dominant in their group. They can have a slow wagging tail. They can sometimes even roll on their back to display their most exposed parts. So, their stomach or their throats, and they can also have a raised paw. Okay, and then here are just some more pictures from our studies. I'm just going to take this one right here. This is my other dog, Paulo, and he is, as you can tell, he's in a submissive position. So he's kind of exposing his most vulnerable parts in this particular picture. Okay, so our third and final objective, we wanted to know the average number of times a specific dog shows a dominant behavior while playing in a group of 3 other dogs. So how many times does this dog show a dominant behavior? And this is another picture from our study. This is Dozer, my other dog, and he's being very dominant over Apollo right here. Okay, so for our study species, obviously we chose domestic dogs. So these were our personal or friend or family dogs, but we also got some access to these dogs because of work. Most of the dogs were unrelated, but a pair were brothers. And as I said previously, these are my dogs right here. They are brothers. And then the dogs' age ranged from puppies. So the youngest in our group was 9 months, and the oldest in our group was actually 9 years old. So it was a senior. So we had a big age range there. And we also had both sexes of male and female. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to the rest of my group. Thank you.
Hey everybody, my name is Amanda, and today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the methods we used in our project. So for this project, we decided to have a set number of groups that we would be observing. We named those groups Group A through J. Initially, the first group we planned to have did not work out. There was an aggressive dog. We'll discuss that a little bit later in our presentation. So we had to sub out a few of our dogs for some doggy daycare dogs instead of personal dogs. So groups A through I were all doggy daycare dogs from some of our work. Then group J were my dog and some friends' dog. This is my dog here to the right. His name is Moose. He's a Pyrenees mix. The other 3 dogs in that group were Doodles. So with all of these groups, we decided to have 5 trials of interactions. There were 10 minutes per trial with 10-minute cool-down period in between. So we would get the dogs together, record 10 minutes on a smartphone, take a 10-minute break, do another 10 minutes, and so on until we had our 5 trials for all of our groups. Here's a picture of some of the interactions of my dog with 2 of the other dogs in the interaction that he was in. In this interaction, there wasn't much of a dominant behavior. They were all a pretty friendly group, so you won't see much data from them, but I thought this was kind of a cute picture of them all together. So once we had all of their interactions recorded, we would look at a set of questions to determine the results of our data. The first question being, is there any dominant behavior at all present in the trial? We sort of went off of a chart like the one over here to the right. We can see some body behaviors and body language that would indicate there was dominant behavior going on. So that was checkbox number 1. If there was dominant behavior present, we would go on and further analyze the data. If there is the dominant behavior, how many of the individuals exhibit at least 2 dominant behavior in that trial? And then finally, how many times does the individual display a dominant behavior? So we basically first had to determine if a dominant behavior was present, and then go ahead and determine how many times an individual exhibited that dominant behavior. From there, we could kind of analyze the rest of the results and see how that relates to our hypothesis. So those are our methods for this project. I'm going to turn it over to our group mate to talk a little bit about the results and an interpretation of our data. Thank you.
Results of our study. We obtained these results by watching our recorded data and taking note of every dominant behavior that was displayed. This table shows the number of dominant behavior displays in all of the trials and all of the groups. Groups A, E, I, and J had no dominant behaviors in any of the trials, and Group C had the most displays of dominant behavior. Within the trials, the number of dominant behaviors ranged from 0 to 11. The groups that displayed dominant behaviors were groups B, C, D, F, G, and H. In B, there was 1 dog who displayed dominant behaviors. In C, 2 dogs. In D, 2 dogs. In F, 2 dogs. In G, 3 dogs. And in H, 2 dogs. We had a total of 40 dogs, 16 were female and 24 were male. 4 female dogs displayed dominant behavior. That's about 25% of the females. And 8 male dogs showed dominant behavior. That's about 1/3 of the males. Overall, only 12 dogs displayed any dominant behaviors, 33% of our population. This table shows the total number of dominant displays each dominant dog showed through the trials and the average number per trial. For our hypothesis, we predicted that dogs would, on average, display 2 dominant behaviors. We only had one dog that, on average, displayed 2 dominant behaviors. As you can see, Yosi was the only dog to be at an average of 2. Everyone else either had an average over or under 2. Rex had by far the most number of displays, 17 total, averaging 4.25 per trial, while Juno, Ella, and Bella had the least amount of displays with just 1 total display each. So we actually encountered an issue while trying to obtain our data, dogs being too aggressive and dominant. A problem with pairing unknown dogs is you don't know how they will react to each other. We tried to keep the study as random as possible, but there were actually some dogs in our population and trials that we could not put together since they have been known to previously not get along with each other. However, sometimes you don't know when dogs aren't going to get along. One of our original trials could not be completed because one dog became overly aggressive with 2 of the other dogs he was introduced to. Since I work very closely with most of the dogs in our study, I see this issue a lot. Some dogs not liking a certain breed or a certain temperament, or dogs that are bigger than them or smaller than them, and some dogs just simply don't like each other. Neither one will be submissive to the other, resulting in overaggression and sometimes leading to a fight. Overaggression is sometimes only seen in one isolated instance without any prior warning to it occurring, since said dog gets along well with other dogs or they behave well at home and with humans. But typically, dog behavior in the home or with humans does not reflect how they will interact with a group of unfamiliar dogs. We dealt with this issue that we encountered of extreme aggression here by separating the problematic group to ensure the safety of all of the dogs and creating another group instead. We started with a question: how many dominant behaviors do dogs exhibit within a given time frame? At an individual level, we were able to answer this question. We have video footage and raw data to provide the answers, but we don't believe we were able to answer this question in a broader general sense. While we were able to fulfill all of our objectives, our data does not support our hypothesis since only one of the dogs, about 2.5% of our population, had an average of 2 dominant behaviors per trial. Prior to this study, we thought most dogs were going to display at least some dominant behaviors. But after completing the trials, we were surprised to see most dogs actually didn't demonstrate those behaviors. A lot of the dogs whose behaviors and personality and body languages I know very well from working with them for quite a while didn't react the way I expected in the trials. Some dogs who I expected to display dominant behaviors did not. For example, I thought Maverick and Juno were going to display way more dominant behaviors since they typically do when I work with them. And some dogs I was very surprised displayed any dominant behaviors, such as Yosi, Ella, and Bella. Ella is actually known for being an extremely submissive dog when she plays during daycare. And then some dogs I was surprised by how many displays of dominant behavior they had. I knew Rex was prone to dominant behaviors, but I didn't realize it was that many times, just within 10 minutes. From our data, we can conclude that only 2.5% of dogs will express dominant behaviors in a 10-minute trial. Ultimately, our data shows that most dogs do not display an average of 2 dominant behaviors every 10 minutes. They are in a group of 4 dogs. However, there's also an additional conclusion that we would like to draw from this, and that is dominance appears to be situational and individual, since it varies extremely from dog to dog, since some dogs do not display anything, and some dogs displayed up to 4.25 displays per trial. Differences about individual dogs based on our data, but we can't make many definitive conclusions like most dogs display dominant behaviors, or if they do display dominant behaviors, it would only be 2 times, since our data appears too varied for that. The main general inference we can make is males tend to exhibit more dominant behavior than females, since 33% of our males displayed at least one dominant behavior, while only 25% of our females did. The main two individual inferences we can make are when Rex and Bane are in an environment with Zero, they will attempt to repeatedly dominate him. And while playing, Yozi prefers to be dominant over Strike since she had more dominant displays than him while they were playing. But we can also conclude that our population was too varied since we had dogs aged from puppy to senior in many different breeds. So, from our study, we can build off of it to narrow down the parameters by age, breed, and sex. Even by size of the group they are in, it would be interesting to see if a dog becomes more dominant or submissive if you change the size of the group they are in. Further studies should focus on just one parameter to reduce the variables in each trial and group. That way, we could make more assertive claims and more definitive conclusions that could be applicable to larger populations instead of just one individual dog. But ultimately, from our data that we acquired, we can only currently conclude that just 1 in 40 dogs will exhibit 2 dominant behaviors every 10 minutes they are in a group of 4 dogs. We hope you enjoyed our presentation. Thank you for watching.